Hello, I'm Laura McCaughey, your host for tonight for what is set to be a thought-provoking and interesting talk from Dr Jody Morgan on the topic of pill testing and why it's important. Before I introduce our speaker, I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation upon whose ancestral lands UTS's City campus, from which we are streaming, now stands. I would also like to pay respects to the elders both past and present, acknowledging them as the traditional custodians of knowledge for this land. Some quick housekeeping before we get into the interesting research part. We want you to ask all the questions you've been dying to ask about pill testing research. So to do this, type your questions into the Q&A box in your Zoom control panel, and myself and Jody will do our best to answer these over the next 40 minutes. You can ask anonymously, and also if you like a question someone else has asked and would like it answered, then please use the upvoting tool, which is the wee thumbs up symbol next to the question itself. This session will also be recorded, but we will not be recording any video or audio input from the audience. If you have any concerns or questions over this, you can contact the Soapbox team via email at soapboxsciencesydney@gmail.com. I'd like to give a quick introduction about Soapbox Science Sydney before I introduce Jody. Our events are designed to be a platform for promoting female researchers and the research that they do. Our events usually transform public areas into an arena for public learning and scientific debate, where everyone has the opportunity to enjoy, learn from, question, interact with, and be inspired by some of our leading researchers. But with COVID-19, we're turning our living rooms into these arenas instead. Although this year's event is taking a very different format, we still want to give everyone attending the opportunity to interact with our speakers, learn more about current research, and hopefully be inspired to find out more. And this is where Dr. Jody Morgan comes in. Jody is a working mum and is what she likes to call a returned scientist who found her way back to research after 10 years in other roles. Jody is now an associate research fellow at the University of Wollongong, using her medicinal chemistry knowledge of molecules and the way molecules interact with the human body to try to minimize harm from potentially toxic compounds. Her research covers a wide variety of substances, from illicit drugs to alcohol, nicotine, various pollutants, and countless other substances. Tonight, Jody will be talking about her research on pill testing, which involves trying to find out the best lab-based methods to analyse illicit drugs and work out exactly what is in a pill. Over to you, Jody.
Thank you very much, Laura. And hello, everyone. And thank you very much for coming along tonight to listen to me talk about my research. So I am Dr. Jody Morgan, like Laura just said, and I'm a researcher at the University of Wollongong. I am a chemist and I work in the field of toxicology research. So what exactly does that mean? Well, basically, I study compounds which cause harm to humans. And part of any study that deals with harm involves finding ways to try to reduce or minimize that harm. So I want us to start tonight by casting our minds back to before COVID, if we can do that, and back to before the bushfires, all the way back to the 2018-2019 summer in Australia, where tragically 5 young Australians died at music festivals. So all 5 of those individuals died as a result of taking ecstasy, which us chemists call 3,4-methylene dioxymethamphetamine. But for the rest of today, we're going to call it MDMA. So as a scientist and as a toxicologist, I immediately started thinking about what could we possibly do to prevent other young Australians from suffering the same fate. The answer is blindingly obvious. We just need to get everyone to stop taking illegal drugs. Easy, done, problem solved. Except, of course, it's not easy at all. These drugs, including MDMA, are already illegal. We already have a zero tolerance policy in place. Music festivals have police checks and sniffer dogs and body searches. And despite all of this, people still take illegal drugs. We know the current methods aren't working. We know that regardless of how many times some young people are told not to do something, whether that is driving a car after drinking alcohol, hanging out with their friends while they're supposed to be on a COVID lockdown, or taking an illegal drug, some young people are just going to do it anyway. So we've tried and we know we can't stop young people from taking drugs. but can we make the process of taking drugs a little bit safer somehow? So as a society, we've already put some harm reduction methods into place at music festivals. We have free water available, we have chill out areas, and we have safe places where people can seek medical assistance if they feel unwell without the fear of police intervention. So pill testing in Australia has the potential to become another of these harm reduction methods. Just one more string in that bow in the endeavour to reduce the harms associated with illegal drugs. So before we continue, I want to set up our first poll question so I can get some feedback from all of you. So how should pill testing be funded in Australia? Should it be a user pay system? Should the music festival organisers fund the pill testing, or should it be centrally funded by the government? So plug in your answers and we can discuss the results of that poll a little bit later on. All right, so what do we mean when we say pill testing? Well, pill testing, which is also called drug checking, is just that. It's a way of checking what is in a drug. But, and here's the important bit, it isn't only checking what is in the drug. A well-designed pill testing service, which is what myself and my collaborators are advocating for in Australia and what my research is trying to improve, a well-designed pill testing service is far more than just the process of analysing what is in the drug. The aim is not only to check pills, but also to educate. We're trying to start a conversation with young people who use drugs on a casual basis. So in Australia, we've had 2 pill testing trials to date, both of which were in the ACT, which is the only state or territory in Australia which has approved a trial so far. Both were at the Groove and the Moo festivals in 2018 and then again in 2019. So we're going to use that as an example, and I want to walk you through the process of how pill testing worked at those trials. So you have a pill which you believe is MDMA. You've heard that there is a pill testing service operating at the festival, so you decide to go along to the pill testing service and double check your pill. So you're in the pill testing area and you have a chat with a peer advisor, you fill out a form, and that form asks you some questions about what your plans are for taking illegal drugs that day and what your experiences with illegal drugs in the past might be. A chemist takes a small sample of your drug and they test it. And we're going to talk more a little bit later on about the types of tests that the chemist can run. So once your drug has been tested, the information is given to a healthcare professional, which is either a doctor or a drug and alcohol counsellor. And we have what we call a brief intervention. So you sit down and you have a conversation with that health professional. So you sit down and you wait for them to give you the green light and tell you your pill is good and safe to take. Only that's not what happens. Instead, they talk to you about your drug taking history. They discuss your testing results. So it turns out the main component in your drug was in fact MDMA. But that doesn't mean that there aren't other more dangerous substances present in lower amounts. They talk about the risk of overdose, even for capsules that contain only MDMA. And importantly, they tell you that no illegal drug is safe to take, but they give you some tips on ways that you could decrease the risks associated with taking MDMA. And they show you how you can dispose of your drug in an amnesty bin if you've decided it just isn't worth the risk. Or perhaps your capsule didn't contain MDMA at all. Instead, it was N-ethylpentylone, which is a higher risk drug. It's more potent than MDMA, and it has a higher risk of unwanted side effects. And that drug was actually identified in 7 samples at the Groove and the Moo Festival in 2019. So before we take our first lot of questions, I really want to stress the point that at no time during the pill testing process will anyone, not the chemist, not the counsellor, not the doctor, not the peer advisor, no one will tell an individual that their drug is safe to take. There is no green light. And on that point, I am happy to take some questions.
Thanks, Jody. We have the results of your poll, and the result is that people think the government should pay, but that is quite closely followed by users should pay. And then music festival organisers aren't that far behind either. So I guess it's not that clear-cut an answer for you.
Yeah, that's I'm personally I'm glad the government pays was the #1 option there. But I guess the fact that it came out fairly equal kind of leads into something I wanted to mention anyway, which is the fact that there is no definitive way that this needs to be funded. And around the world, pill testing is funded in a range of different ways. So in some places like the UK, it is an entirely voluntary process. So they fundraise to pay for their equipment and to pay for all their expendables. And they have volunteers that actually come in as the chemists and the medical professionals to run their pill testing service. In some places in the United States, the pill testing is a user pay system. So you want to have your pill tested, you pay a fee in order to have that done. So there is no definitive way that we have to be doing this in Australia. It could be however we decide at the time. Obviously, I prefer the government pays option, and the Greens have already put together a proposal for 18 fixed site pill testing locations that would be spread across Australia, and that for 4 years to fully fund that would cost $16 million, which might sound like a lot of money, but to give you some context, in the last 12 months, the New South Wales Police brought in $20 million by providing police people at music festivals. So it really isn't a lot of money in the grand scheme of things.
Well, that answers one of our questions we had from our audience, was how much does pill testing cost? Following on from, we're talking about the government there, why is the New South Wales government not supportive of pill testing? Why is it only the ACT that's got on board so far?
That's a very good question. That comes down to Gladys and her current stance on, obviously we don't want to have a go at our Premier, but Gladys Berejiklian has been very, very staunch in her decision to be anti-pill testing. And what was exceedingly disappointing was when they finished the inquest into the deaths of the 5 people who died at those music festivals, and the deputy coroner handed down her report, she actually recommended that pill testing be trialled in New South Wales. And despite the very strong evidence that was provided in that inquest, unfortunately, the Premier still said that she was not willing to pursue that course. We are trying our best to convince her otherwise, and we will have to just see how it goes. I know that the current acting opposition leader in New South Wales has already said that if she gets in, that she will allow a trial to go ahead.
That's good, and hopefully if you get positive results from other trials that you can run in the ACT or maybe some of the other states, then that might help persuade her as well. We've got a question here. With COVID, there won't be any festivals anytime soon. So the taking of pills will still take place elsewhere, such as people's homes. Are there any kits for people to test their pills at home?
All right, so I'm going to talk in the next section a little bit about those home testing kits. So I'll leave that part for then. But you're right, the way in which people are taking drugs has changed significantly, and potentially also the type of illicit drugs that people are taking, because people do tend to take different types of drugs when they're in a music festival, dance, nightclub setting compared to when they are in their own home. So yes, absolutely changing context, but obviously that isn't going to be forever. So it provides scientists at the moment with kind of a little reprieve where we can actually try and get a lot of this research done. So by the time we are back to music festivals, we can have all of our techniques up and ready to go, so we can actually step forward with some of these trials.
Would it be better to make drugs legal and then make sure that they're safe to start with, instead of having to try and test the pills?
So that's outside my field of expertise. That's gets into the personal opinion realm, we'll call it. So obviously, yes, if they were legal, we would be able to introduce far more harm reduction mechanisms, absolutely. And one of the other things that I research is actually electronic cigarettes. So I've got the same argument going with that at the moment with the potential regulation. So that's probably sort of a lighter version, but exactly the same arguments. If we regulate it, then we can control what is in the electronic cigarettes. If we don't regulate it, then we can't, and there is a risk there to users. So yes, you are correct, but I'm gonna pass on that question.
Each to their own. We've got lots more questions to come, and we do have more time for questions, but I would like to hear more about your research just now, and we'll get to these questions in a few minutes. So back over to you, Jody.
So a little bit earlier, we talked about how pill testing worked overall, but now I really want to focus in on the chemical testing and analysis of the pills themselves, which as a chemist is the part in the process that I am particularly involved in. So let's talk through some of the types of testing that we're able to do. So some of you might have heard of chemical test kits, which that question was just about before. So they're also known as DIY test kits or do them at home test kits. So these are basically a reagent that you add to your drug and it produces a coloured response when a particular drug is present. They're legal in Australia and you can purchase them from some pharmacies and from the internet, but unfortunately, they are only going to be able to give you a limited amount of information. So let's give an example. So when you mix a small sample of your drug with a test reagent, let's say it turns blue. And that tells you that your drug is likely to contain some MDMA. But your drug could also contain other dangerous substances that aren't showing up in that test. Your drug could also contain no MDMA at all, but contain something else, which also happens to produce a blue coloured response. So if you are going to use these do-it-yourself test kits, make sure you use multiple reagents. So they quite often come with 4 reagents in them. Run all 4 tests. That improves the chances of finding dangerous compounds, and it also improves the chances of getting a false positive. But the most important thing, if you are going to use these, is to be aware that that method does have significant limitations, but better than nothing. So the chemical test kits weren't used in the trials that were run in the ACT at Groove in the Moon. So what did they use as the technique at those trials? Well, they used a technique called Fourier transform infrared spectroscopy, or FTIR, which is a mouthful, I know. So we're going to call it the light method. How does it work? So you take a compound, you shine infrared light at your compound, and your compound is going to absorb that light at different wavelengths. Sounds pretty complex, but what we get is effectively a series of peaks, and it looks something like this. So we literally get a series of peaks. Doesn't matter how complicated it looks. What is important is that these peaks are unique for a particular compound. So every time we shine the light at MDMA, we get this same pattern of peaks appearing. And in that way, we can consider the pattern of peaks in this light method to be just like a fingerprint. It's unique and it can be used to identify the compound. So how does this work in a pill testing setting? Well, a chemist takes a small sample of your drug and they place it on the instrument. They shine the infrared light on the sample and the instrument records the sample's fingerprint. The instrument then automatically compares the fingerprint of your sample to a database which contains thousands of fingerprints of different compounds, and it produces a percentage match. So this method works really well when the sample contains mostly a single compound. So to stick with our fingerprint analogy, and I was going to do the ink live, but I made a lot of mess earlier in the day with ink, so I have pre-made up some fingerprints. So if I have a single fingerprint, which is like what I have up here, then you can see it would be very easy to work out who I am using that fingerprint. However, if I have a lot of fingerprints that are overlapping, which is what happens when there are lots of different compounds in the sample, then it becomes really difficult to use that fingerprint to generate a match to me. And it means that the percentage match is going to decrease and the chemist can't be sure what the sample actually contains. So advantages of this light method are that you can get a lot of information about the major components in your drug really, really quickly. So the test only takes a few minutes from the start to the end. The biggest disadvantage of this method is that it can't determine dose. And by dose, we mean it can't tell you how much MDMA there is in your pill. Does that matter? Well, yes, absolutely it does matter, because we know that the 5 young people that died at music festivals over that 2018-2019 summer all died from an overdose of MDMA, not from adulterants or other contaminants, but from ingesting too much MDMA. So we need a technique which can also determine dose. So one such technique is called gas chromatography mass spectrometry, or GCMS. A mouthful, again, I know. We're going to call this one the separation method. So if we think back to our overlapping fingerprints up here, imagine how useful it would be if we could separate them first and then analyze each fingerprint individually. and work out exactly what compounds we have in our sample. And that's exactly how the separation technique, or GCMS, works. It separates out our fingerprints individually, and then we can examine each one to work out a match. And it just so happens that the size of the fingerprint, or more specifically, the size of the peaks within that compound's fingerprint, can be used to determine how much compound we have, and we can work backwards to work out how much MDMA was in the original pill or capsule. So this separation technique, or GCMS, is already used to analyse illegal drugs in forensic laboratories all over the world. The problem is it can take more than an hour to run a single sample. And in a pill testing setting where people are waiting for their result, clearly that's not going to work. So where I fit into the pill testing puzzle is that I'm trying to develop a method using this separation technique to analyse drug samples quickly, to provide the identification of the compounds present by comparing to the fingerprints of known drugs, and to calculate how much MDMA was in the pill or capsule, so we can incorporate this into any future pill testing programs in Australia. And on that point, I am happy to take some more questions.
Thanks, Jody. We have lots of questions here. I'm going to start with one that a few people are asking, and it's just to clarify, why should the government pay for pill testing? Why do you think?
Yeah, all right. So I guess the biggest thing is that we have the ability to save the government money by introducing pill testing. So the idea behind this is not just to save lives, which obviously is the main point behind pill testing, but also to stop people overdosing in general. If we can stop people from having undergoing an overdose, we can stop medical requirements at music festivals, and we can also stop the ambulance costs and the paramedic costs and the emergency room costs and the ICU costs. And I mean, and the average ICU bed costs $4,000 per person per day. So that adds up very quickly when people are having overdoses at music festivals. And I can go into numbers if you want. We have about, so the estimates are in the last 12 months, approximately 600,000 Australians over the age of 14 used ecstasy. If the estimates are that there's about a 1% medical requirement rate amongst those people. So that would be 6,000 people that required some form of medical intervention just in the past 12 months, just from MDMA.
To me, it sounds like it saves money and it saves lives. So it sounds like a win-win situation. A few other people are also wanting to know, is there any strong evidence suggesting that pill testing works research-wise?
You have read my mind, because my entire next section of talking is all about just that. So I'm not going to answer that one yet, but I'm going to talk about that in the next section.
Good, because I think that people want to know what research supports this. Did trying to educate people during the trial stop anyone from taking the drugs?
I'm actually going to mention that as well, but yeah, yes, it did. So that is obviously going to be one of our main determinants as to whether we are being successful. So yes, I won't give you the numbers because once again, it's going to spoil what I'm going to say, but yes, definitely did.
Keeping us in suspense, I like it. What else can be done alongside pill testing to minimise harm?
I guess, so at the moment, a lot of the concepts behind, so we already have a lot of advocate groups that are already in place at music festivals, groups like DanceWise and other advocate groups in Australia who are general advocates of harm reduction. So not only are they educating people on safer ways to use drugs, they're educating people about how to interact with each other in a social space, particularly whilst intoxicated. There's lots of sex education taking place as well. Obviously, there's supply of condoms and everything else, because these music festivals, in addition to being places where people do take illicit drugs, they are also places where people do partake in sexual intercourse and other things. So they are providing broader education across a range of different concepts. So I think, and then as I mentioned earlier, we also then have our general medical units that are now compulsorily available at music festivals, where we have trained doctors and nurses and paramedics available on site for any time anyone gets hurt. And I think it's something I've always found a bit of a bit of a contradiction in terms, because most people are more than happy for a person who had undergone an overdose to be helped by a medical team, but they seem to have an objection to us trying to help them before they take the drug, which has to be a more sensible pathway. We're trying to stop them from taking the drug and give them information about drugs before they actually consume the drug, which is, I think, a much more useful method for harm reduction.
I've got one more question before we move on to your next section. Are there any other benefits of pill testing other than finding the substance and providing health advice? I know you touched on cost saving.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's one really big one, which is that we can gather information about what drugs are on the market. So we at the moment don't have an ongoing facility by which there are people regularly testing drugs that are available on the Australian market. So over in Europe, there are lots of pill testing facilities that have been set up for a really long time. The DIMS in the Netherlands has been in existence for over 20 years. So they have some of the best up-to-date information on the drugs that are available in the market in that country all the time, because they do have this regular pill testing process. So we can identify what drugs are available at any given time. We can identify if there's any new dangerous substances on the market, because we're regularly testing. We can identify if there's any high dose pills that have become available on the market. And then you can attach to that a warning system, so that even the people who aren't actively participating in the pill testing themselves can still receive benefits out of that pill testing process.
Excellent. So I'll let you answer the questions that people want to know the answers to. So I'll hand back over to you, and then we'll wrap up in a few minutes with more Q&A.
All right, so to start this final section, we're going to run another poll. So this one is a simple yes or no answer. Do you think pill testing should be trialled in Australia? So put your answer in and we can discuss the findings at the end. So as we just mentioned, this last section, what I really want to talk about is, does pill testing work? So to start with, we're going to have to realize there are a number of different ways we can interpret work. So the obvious one is, does pill testing save lives? And the truth here is, we might never know. So this year, due to COVID, we've had lots of exposure to harm reduction methods, things like hand washing and social distancing and mask wearing. But can we come up with a concrete number as to how many lives we saved by taking these measures? No, we can't. We can make an educated guess by comparing with other places that didn't put the measures in place, but we can't come up with a concrete number as to how many lives were saved. And that's because if someone doesn't take a pill, or if someone changes their consumption behaviour following our pill testing, we have no way of proving they would have died without the intervention. And some people are using this to claim that pill testing doesn't work. But that concept is just a reality of all forms of harm reduction work. But as I mentioned before, pill testing isn't just about saving lives. So another benefit of pill testing is the potential to decrease the number of people who require medical treatment at festivals. And importantly, the number of people that require higher levels of medical care in hospital transfer. So is there any evidence for a decrease in hospitalisation in places where pill testing occurs? Well, the Loop in the UK have been operating for a number of years in a music festival setting. And they use a system which is a little bit similar to the one that was used at Groove in the Moo, where a chemist performs some testing, and they also need that one-on-one discussion with a healthcare provider in order to receive the results. So when the people at the Loop directly compared the number of festival attendees who were transported to hospital from a 2015 festival where there was no pill testing to the same festival the following year in 2016 where there was pill testing, they saw a 95% reduction in hospital transfers associated with drug overdose. So yes, this could have been related to a number of different factors, but it certainly provides some evidence that this might be working. So we know deaths and hospitalizations are difficult to measure because if we're successful in our harm reduction, they don't happen. So what is something more concrete that we could measure? What about, do people dispose of their drugs when they're told they differ from what they thought they contained. Complex sentence. What we mean is, you think your drug is MDMA, you get it tested, it turns out it's not. Do you take the drug anyway, or do you throw it away? So at the same festival we were just talking about in the UK, where the pill testing was performed by the Loop, they found that when the content of the pill differed from what the individual thought it was supposed to contain, 67% of people, so that's 2/3, disposed of the drug straight away in the amnesty bin. And interestingly, even if it matched what it was supposed to contain, 9% of people disposed of it anyway, following that one-on-one discussion with a healthcare professional. So what about at the trials in Australia? Well, at the Groove and the Moo trial in 2019, there were those 7 cases of N-ethylpentylone that we talked about before, the drug with the higher toxicity than MDMA. So 6 of the 7 people that had that drug disposed of it straight away in the amnesty bin, and the additional person said they were going to dispose of it elsewhere. So even a skeptic has to admit that those sorts of disposal rates suggest that there is a real possibility pill testing could and will save lives. More evidence. So what about, do young people who have gone through the pill testing process change their behaviour? Which sort of linked into the question that was asked before. So once again, from the trial in Australia in 2019, they ran a survey, an independent survey run by a separate group. And they found that 7% of the people who used the pill testing service and were surveyed were not going to use any drugs or alcohol that day following the intervention. 6%, another 6% on top of the 7%, said they would only consume alcohol, and 28% reported that they would use a smaller amount of the drug following that intervention. So that's explicit evidence that they changed their behaviour to be more safe following that pill testing intervention. And if that isn't the definition of success, then I don't know what is. So could pill testing have saved the lives of those 5 young people who died at music festivals? Possibly. I can't definitively say that it would have, but by checking for dangerous adulterants, determining the dose in the pill or the capsule, and providing targeted education and information to young people at music festivals, we have the potential to undoubtedly reduce the harms associated with drug taking. The good news is that the Australian public is getting on board, with the most recent statistics, which were released just a couple of weeks ago, showing that 57% of Australians now support pill testing and only 27% oppose its introduction. So the aim for my talk today is to try and get a few more of you across that line. So let's get back and answer some more of your questions.
Thanks, Jody. We've got the results of your poll, and you'll be glad to know that our audience are even more on board with pill testing, with 93% saying that they do think it should be trialled in Australia.
Outstanding. Well, I'm going to take complete responsibility for that. So I've talked you guys up from, I'm going to say, from 57% to 93. No, not really. Thank you. And obviously, we're advocates for this. There really doesn't seem to be a downside. I think most people that are anti-pill testing really believe that we are promoting drugs, but nothing could be further from the truth. The people that are involved in this process.
That is a question a few people have asked on the Q&A, is will having pill testing sites encourage people to take more pills?
So the evidence from overseas suggests no. So where there has been pill testing for 20 years, they have seen no increase in the rates of drug use in those countries. And like I said earlier, no one ever says a drug is safe. In fact, they explicitly state the exact opposite. Every single person who participates in pill testing is going to be verbally told that pill testing is not safe. So I think that idea that we're promoting pill testing is, well, it's not true, but I think that there is a fear there that people think that some people who are possibly on the fence and considering taking a drug, that this might somehow convince them. And I guess what we can say in regards to that is, number one, a person has to already be in possession of a pill or a capsule in order to participate in the pill testing process. This can't be something where you're thinking about it and you show up to the pill testing tent. You have to already have something in your possession to be tested, to be participating. So you have to have already made that decision and committed to purchasing something before that this can take place. So that's number one. And then put yourself, if you're the type of person who thinks that people might be convinced to change their mind based on this pill testing process, put yourself in those shoes. If you were the type of person who would not have taken an illicit drug, I'm that type of person. Would pill testing have changed my mind? No, absolutely not. And certainly not knowing what they're going to be told when they sit down in a pill testing brief intervention.
Yeah, it wouldn't change my mind either. So we've got some questions here. These ones are a bit linked. Can you determine the percentage of a contaminant in the drug? And can you recognise a new psychoactive drug that you don't know of yet, something that's new to the market?
Yep. So in terms of determining amounts of other things, so my method at the moment that we're trying to develop would only determine the amount of the MDMA. We can, in theory, expand that out to identify the amounts of more things, but it would have to be something that we were trying to identify for a purpose, because we have to develop an entire calibration curve for every single thing that we want to determine. So a calibration curve is just basically a series of a standard of that particular compound that we know is that compound at different concentrations that we run through our system. And then we can compare the unknown one to the ones that we know to work out what the concentration was. So we would need to prepare those for every single thing we wanted to identify. Obviously, if we found that there were particular contaminants that were coming up a lot, we could develop a calibration curve for that. But at the moment, we're starting with MDMA, and we will see how we go from there. Second question was the new psychoactive substances. So that's what we call anything that is new to the market. So the new psychoactive substances are not going to be in our database. So what that means is the fingerprint, so the fingerprint for that particular drug is not going to be in the database. So we can't use the database to identify it. What that means is a new psychoactive substance, let's use a chemical test, for example, is not going to pick it up at all because it's not going to know what it is, or it might color it up the same color as something else. In our light method and our separation method, because there's nothing in the database to compare to, it's not going to come up with a good percentage match. It's going to come up with a really poor percentage match. And as a consequence, we're going to get a really bad number. And we're going to relay that result when we have our intervention. So the result for that is going to be, we don't know what it is. We don't recommend that you take it because we don't know what it is. And the evidence suggests that when you say that to an individual, they are very unlikely to take the substance.
How much drug do you need to use to test what's in it? Because I know if I was going to take these drugs, I wouldn't want to give it all away to get tested.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the UK, where they do the loop, they require a whole pill. So you have to actually hand over an entire pill or an entire capsule in order to participate in the pill testing process. And they find that people still line up and really want to participate in the process, but MDMA is a bit cheaper over in the UK and Europe than it is in Australia. And we are very concerned that if we made a method whereby we needed people to hand over an entire pill, that they might not be as willing to participate in the process. So we're really working to make sure that we don't need to do that. So the light method that was used at the Groove and the Moo trials, that used between 1 to 2 milligrams of substance. So just to scrape off the side of your pill or a little bit out of the inside of a capsule. So not much at all. And then my separation method would use about 1 milligram as well. So we're not talking about huge amounts of the pill. And all of this is obviously a balancing act between cost and time and the amount of pill that we require in order to get as much information as we can and still get people to participate in the process. So I could take your pill and I could forensically analyze that pill. I could work out every single compound that you had in there. I could give you an amount of every single item in there, but that's going to take me 2 days and that's not going to be helpful in a pill testing setting. So obviously it's all a compromise between as much information as we can give as quickly as we can give it.
We've got a question here, and I think it's probably taken it a step further back than your research. So you've said it's better to test these drugs instead of waiting for people to have overdoses. But what else can be done at music festivals to stop the drugs getting in the first place?
Yeah, that's sort of outside of my realm of expertise. Obviously we have a lot of methods already that are employed. We have sniffer dogs and we have strip searches, which we know have been heavily publicised in the media of late. And the evidence suggests that if anything, that is causing people to panic consume drugs before they go in, which is obviously a higher risk. We don't want people consuming more than one pill at a time, because obviously that's going to be a higher risk of overdose. And there is evidence that that is happening. So that methodology doesn't seem to be working. And more importantly, when, so I'm obviously not a public health researcher, I'm a chemist, but when the public health researchers talk to people that are at these festivals, none of them seem to be having difficulty getting access to drugs on site. So that means that any methods that we're currently doing aren't working. I don't know how they're getting in there, but they do seem to be, if you want something, it seems to be available on site at the music festivals. So I don't know. I think that the policing does need to focus more on the people that are dealing and the people that have large supply than on personal possession, because that doesn't seem to be working.
Thanks, Jody. We are almost out of time. There's still so many questions left there to be asked, but unfortunately I'm going to ask one last question, and that is, what got you into research, out of research, and into research?
Well, the out of research was children, and I'll get to the back into research. So I think probably like a lot of people, I always had an underlying interest in science. And I would have said that was all of us, but I have, listening to everyone else's talks over Soapbox Science, I've been amazed at how many people have said they weren't always into science. I was always into science. My first memories of what I wanted to be when I grew up, I remembered wanting to be a pharmacist when I was about 8. And then in high school, I always preferred the science and math subjects over the English and history subjects. But the moment I knew I was going to be a scientist was during my year 10 work experience, when I was lucky enough to go to ANSTO. And I got to move around each day and tag along with a different scientist and experience what they did in their everyday life. And I'm sure my parents would attest to the fact that I came home every day that week gushing about what an amazing time I'd had and all the incredible new things I'd learned. And I think that was the moment for me where it solidified that that was my pathway. I think when it comes down to it, I became a scientist because I love science. I love the idea that I'm a small link in a really long chain, and we are all working to try and make this planet a better place. So I read something on Twitter last week, and I'm sorry I can't cite who wrote it because I did not write it down. But it was something like, science isn't facts or information. Science is the process of discovery. And I think that really rang true to me, because I think that's one thing that all of us participating in Soapbox Science this week have in common. We are all from different disciplines. We all study different topics, but we all have that ultimate goal of discovering something new. So any discussion of me as a scientist wouldn't be complete without acknowledging that my pathway here has been a bit different from everyone else. I am that returned researcher. So I was out of research for 11 years. So I was very lucky that 3 years ago, I did manage to get myself back into a research role and move across into toxicology research, which I absolutely adore. But most importantly, with my move back in, has been that I have a fabulous mentor and supervisor in my current role. And I can't stress how important it is as a female scientist, particularly one who didn't take that normal pathway, to have a strong female role model who is able to mentor me in this way. So my advice to any young women who have a particular interest in science or other STEM fields is find yourself a mentor or a role model, someone you can look up to who can guide you, even just someone that you can ask questions of. And to those of you who are experienced scientists, once again, particularly non-male scientists, step up, reach out to students and early career researchers and mentor them, because having someone in your corner who's going into bat for you and giving you advice really can make all the difference in the world. And finally, I just want to say thanks to everyone for coming along and listening to me today. I hope it's been both thought-provoking and educational. And if you want any more information, please reach out to me on Twitter at Dr Jody Morgan. I am more than happy to answer more questions. Thanks.
Thanks, Jody. It has been thought-provoking and educational. So you've done a really great job tonight. So thank you for all your effort tonight. I also want to thank everyone who attended and asked questions. We had so many questions in the question and answer, and sorry that we didn't manage to get through them all. If you want to watch this talk again, or you know someone who would have enjoyed it, then we'll be posting it on our website in the next weeks. You'll also receive a post-event email in the next 24 hours with an evaluation survey. Please fill this out as it helps us gauge the success of our events and make improvements for next year. We couldn't run Soapbox Science without our sponsors, so I'd like to thank the University of Technology Sydney, Excite on Science, Equus and the University of Wollongong for their continued support. We have so many more great talks lined up over the next 2 nights, starting with Melinda Waterman in 15 minutes, talking about Antarctic mosses and their use for monitoring environmental change. You can enjoy all of these talks from the link you're on now, or you can find more information on our website, soapboxsciencesydney.com. Thank you again for attending, and we hope to see you at our next talk.